When TikTok exploded in popularity in Bangladesh in 2019, it opened up something that nobody had anticipated. For teenagers from low-income families across the country, it felt like a door to something better, a way to get noticed, and maybe to even become someone. And they were willing to do almost anything to get it. Almost immediately, criminal networks began setting up TikTok accounts specifically to exploit it, targeting young girls with promises of fame, modeling contracts, and well-paid work abroad. But with all the people running operations like this, one name stood above the rest. His name was Rafizul Islam Ridoy, a 26-year-old from Magbazar in Dhaka, and he went by Ridoy Babo on TikTok. He had over 71,000 followers on the app and was slowly but surely becoming a recognizable face in Bangladesh's online community. He'd even hosted a pool party for almost 800 of his TikTok followers. His own mother and uncle had thrown him out of the family home years earlier for what they described as bad behavior, and he'd built his life largely online ever since. But behind that following, he was the key agent in a transnational human trafficking operation that had been running for years, moving women and girls from Bangladesh across the border into India and forcefully exploiting them. He hadn't built the operation, but was working for a man known as Rafi, who'd been running the network for 5 years. Ridoy was just the face of it. He was the one with the platform, the followers, and the access to young girls who trusted him because they'd been watching his videos, and he was very good at what he did. He'd add targets to Facebook groups built around TikTok communities, and from there approach them directly. The promise was always the same, a chance to become a TikTok model with well-paid work in call centers and service centers across India, and give them a life that was better than the one they had. This included girls from low-income families and young women with almost nothing to lose and everything to gain. They'd be invited to parties, photographed, and made to feel like something real was happening for them. But soon after, things would turn dark. When the time was right, they'd be told there was a job waiting and they needed to leave soon. They'd be moved to border districts in the southwest of Bangladesh, places like Jashore, Satkira and Janida, and kept in safe houses near the border. Middlemen the gang called linemen would then move them through unfenced stretches of the Bangladesh-India border on foot, with Indian agents waiting on the other side. From there, they were moved through safe houses to Kolkata, then transported further south to Bengaluru, over 1,000 miles from home. In Bengaluru, they were kept in rented houses and were forced to drink and have sex with multiple men. They were told if they refused or went to the police, they'd face 20 years in an Indian prison for crossing the border without a passport. Most of them had no money, no contacts, and no way back. The operation could have continued for years longer if it hadn't been for a single video. In late May 2021, a 4-minute clip started circulating on WhatsApp across Bangladesh and India. It showed a woman being violently tormented and abused by at least 4 men and 1 woman. It was filmed, and it was brutal, and it spread fast. Social media users in both countries were horrified, demanding their law enforcement agencies investigate. Nobody knew at first whether the woman was Bangladeshi or Indian, but both countries wanted answers. The 22-year-old survivor was eventually traced 400 kilometers from where the attack had taken place. She was a Bangladeshi trafficking victim, and one of the men clearly visible in the footage was Ridoy Babo. Indian police moved in on the 27th of May 2021. Officers located Ridoy in Bengaluru, and when they tried to arrest him, he ran. They shot him in the leg, and he went down on the street and was arrested on the spot, along with 5 others. Back in Bangladesh, the RAB, Bangladesh's Rapid Action Battalion, launched raids across the border districts. The wider ringleader, the man known as Rafi, was arrested along with 3 associates, including a 46-year-old woman named Madam Sahida, who'd been operating safe houses along the route. As investigators dug deeper, the full scale of what had been running became clear. Over the 5 years Rafi had run his network, he'd trafficked an estimated 500 women across the border. One of the men arrested separately told police he alone had sent over 1,000 people to India. In total, 11 members of the gang were arrested across both countries. As for Ridoy Babo himself, he was sentenced to life in prison. As for the hundreds of women the network had moved across the border over 5 years, most of their stories have never been told publicly, and most of their names were never made known. It was 2013 when José Jurado Montilla created a TikTok account under the name Dinamita Montilla, and he used it to document his travels across Spain. He'd explore hiking trails, coastal paths, and mountain routes, just talking to the camera about his life on the road. He had around 6,000 followers by 2023, and people tuned in to watch him walk and talk. In his videos, he'd occasionally speak about his past, though not giving too much away. And aside from that, he just came across as a friendly older man. He simply wandered across Spain with nothing but his phone and the open road, a nomad with no fixed home and nowhere in particular to be. In August 2023, he crossed paths with a 42-year-old woman from Seville named Esther Estepa. Esther had grown up in a close family with her parents and her sister Raquel. She was also super close to her mother Josefa. They spoke every single day without fail, by phone, WhatsApp, or even video call. In her early 30s, she'd left Seville to travel across Spain, and for years she'd been living that way. She'd been through a difficult few years by the summer of 2023, having left an abusive relationship, but she was getting back on her feet, and in August, she left a shelter in Alicante and set out on her own again. It was in the lobby of a hostel in Alicante that Esther came across Montilla. The two of them were both traveling alone, and they got talking. They decided to hike together, and on the morning of the 22nd of August, they set off from Denia along the coast toward Gandia, walking 37 kilometers through the Spanish countryside. A few days in, Esther started having pain in her leg and a severe headache, and on the evening of the 22nd, Montilla called emergency services and she was taken to hospital by ambulance. She was discharged at 4:30 in the morning on the 23rd. 13 hours later, Esther's mother received a WhatsApp message from her daughter's phone. It said Esther was broke, that she hadn't behaved properly, and that she was leaving Spain to start a new life in Buenos Aires and wouldn't be in contact anymore. Josefa knew immediately something was wrong. The writing didn't sound like Esther at all. She mentioned leaving with friends, but Josefa knew her daughter didn't have any friends in Alicante, and Esther had 2 dogs at home she loved more than anything. She would never have just left them. So she called the police. In the meantime, Montilla began campaigning on TikTok. He posted videos to his followers retracing the exact routes he and Esther had walked together, begging anyone who might have seen her to come forward. He called Esther's family directly, multiple times, asking about the investigation, expressing concern, and telling them he hoped she was okay. He even claimed at one point that a woman had come forward saying she'd seen Esther. His concern didn't go unnoticed, but it almost became too much. The concern soon felt like harassment as he inserted himself into the investigation, and the family eventually grew suspicious of him. They asked the police to do a background check on him, which only returned some minor arrests for theft some years back. It was only when the family dug deeper themselves that everything took a much darker turn. You see, Montilla hadn't just been arrested for theft. In November 1985, he shot and killed a 57-year-old man named Francisco González inside his farmhouse in Malaga. Montilla confessed to the killing, but claimed self-defense, saying González had come at him with a shotgun first, but González's family denied that account entirely. Before police could even arrest him, he killed 3 more people. In March 1987, he murdered Antonio Paniagua, the personal chauffeur of a famous Spanish flamenco singer, and 2 months after that, he shot and stabbed 2 tourists, one from Germany and one from the United Kingdom, whose bodies were found near the popular Caminito del Rey trail in Malaga. He was arrested shortly after and convicted of all 4 murders. He was sentenced to 123 years in prison, but only served 28. The reason is due to the Parot doctrine, which was a legal mechanism that allowed courts to keep the most dangerous offenders locked up beyond the standard maximum sentence outlined in European law. In 2013, the European Court of Human Rights overturned it, ruling that it violated the rights of prisoners. Hundreds of convicted killers across Spain walked free as a result, and Montilla was one of them. When he was released, he was 52 years old, with nowhere to go and nothing to his name. And within months, he'd created a TikTok account and started walking. And the same man that was campaigning for Esther's safe return was the same man that had murdered her. Spanish authorities had already been investigating a separate case, the 2022 murder of a 21-year-old college student named David, who'd been found shot twice on his family's farm in Malaga. Before he died, David had told his father he'd been approached by an older man who looked very shady and wanted to go out hunting foxes together. DNA found on the zip of the bag David had with him matched someone on the police database with the surname Jurado. A search of the family tree led investigators straight to José Jurado Montilla. The problem now was finding him. Montilla had no fixed address and was constantly on the move, but he'd been documenting his every step on TikTok. Investigators went through his videos, piecing together timestamps, background scenery, and location clues to track his movements across Spain, until they finally narrowed down where he was. In May 2024, they arrested him at a sports bar near the Spain-Portugal border while he was filming himself. When they seized his phone, they found what they'd been looking for: images and videos connecting him directly to Esther, including photographs of a woman's body in a sleeping bag in a remote field. He was charged in connection with her death shortly after. In February 2024, a hiker had already discovered a human skull at the foot of a mountain near Byren Castle in Gandia, alongside a canal junction. It wasn't confirmed as Esther's until June of that year, when the rest of her remains were found, scattered nearby in a reed bed, skeletalized from months of exposure. A forensic examination confirmed she'd been struck over the head with a blunt object and physically assaulted before she died. Montilla has denied everything. He's currently in prison awaiting trial for the murders of both Esther Estepa and David, but a date has yet to be confirmed. As for Esther's family, they still mark the 23rd of August as the anniversary of the day they lost her, the last day they ever heard from her. Toward the end of 2018, a TikTok account appeared under the username Lansostiles. The profile said it belonged to a 13-year-old boy who was posting videos and reaching out to girls his own age to chat and make friends. He was also active in similar profiles across Snapchat, Instagram, and even a site called Meet Me, which, for those who don't know, is an app to chat to like-minded people directly via live video. His reasoning was to cast as wide a net as possible across as many platforms as he could, even going so far as to list his phone number publicly on his TikTok profile. By late 2018, he'd been in contact with at least 21 girls, with some of them being as young as 9 years old. At first, the conversation was pretty normal, as they'd talk about their favourite shows, music and food. But eventually, Lansostiles pushed the conversation towards something far darker. He started speaking more suggestively and inappropriately, and somewhere along the way, simply speaking to these girls wasn't enough. He started pushing for something more. He wanted to know where these girls lived. And in November 2019, one of those 9-year-old girls told him just that. When he arrived at the house, it was clear that Lansostiles wasn't 13 years old like he claimed to be, and he didn't have good intentions. His name was James Anthony Gonzalez, a 35-year-old man from Rolling Hills Estates in Los Angeles, and he'd driven to the home of a 9-year-old girl he'd been talking to on TikTok. He posed as a delivery driver, but the girl's mother answered the door and immediately called the police after she was suspicious. She later handed them the TikTok messages between Gonzalez and her daughter, and when investigators looked into his background, they realized that this wasn't the first time he'd done something like this. In 2003, 15 years earlier, he'd inappropriately touched an underage family friend, and in 2017, just a year before creating the Lansostiles account, he'd groped an underage female relative. He was later arrested on the 7th of February 2019. When investigators searched his phone and personal computer, they found multiple images of CSAM on both devices. He pleaded no contest to 2 counts of lewd acts on a child under 14 and 1 count of possession of CSAM, and was sentenced to 10 years and 8 months in state prison. He was also ordered to register as a sex offender for the rest of his life. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department released his mugshot and the surveillance image of him standing on that little girl's doorstep publicly, warning there could be more victims out there they hadn't yet identified. As for the accounts themselves, they've since been taken down. Maracay is a city in the north of Venezuela, about 60 miles west of Caracas, in a state called Aragua. And if you know anything about Venezuelan organized crime, you'll already know why that matters. Because Aragua is where the Tren de Aragua, one of the most feared gangs in Latin America, was born. The Tren de Aragua started inside a single prison in the early 2000s in a facility called Tocaron, where inmates had essentially taken full control of the building. They were running their own economy, rules, and even their own criminal empire from inside the walls. But what started as a prison gang spread outside those walls and grew into something far larger, moving across Venezuela and then across borders into Chile, Peru, Colombia, Brazil, and eventually the United States, where in 2025, the Trump administration designated it a foreign terrorist organization and offered a $12 million reward for its leadership. Its activities span drug trafficking, human trafficking, kidnapping, extortion, forced prostitution, and murder. The US State Department has described it as one of the most dangerous transnational criminal organizations in the Western Hemisphere. In 2023, Venezuelan security forces raided Tocaron with 11,000 agents and reclaimed the prison, but the gang's leadership escaped. Since then, the Venezuelan government has claimed that the Tren de Aragua no longer exists and was fully dismantled, but nobody in Maracay believed that, including Gabriel Jesus Sarmiento Rodriguez. He was 25 years old and a programmer and cybersecurity analyst who'd built a TikTok account under the username Unleaks with around 76,000 followers. His videos would document alleged police corruption, gang activity, and government collusion, all while he filmed from the streets of Maracay as he walked to courthouses to follow up on his own complaints. He tagged high-ranking government officials directly in his posts, including Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello and Aragua State Governor Joana Sanchez, making clear he wanted his accusations to be seen by exactly the people he was accusing. He named members of both the Tren de Aragua and a second gang called the Tren del Llano, posting photos and videos of alleged members publicly. He accused police officers from a unit called the DAET, the Directorate of Strategic and Tactical Actions, of extorting him and working hand-in-hand with criminal networks. In one of his final videos, he said directly, "I was kidnapped by the DAET. We are overrun with delinquent officials who work with common criminals." He also named the Tren de Aragua's fugitive leader, Hector Rustaford Guerrero Flores, known as Niño Guerrero, one of Venezuela's most wanted criminals, and a man the US State Department has offered a $5 million reward for. He did it by name, on camera, to tens of thousands of people. But it wasn't just words he was spewing. Sarmiento claimed he'd previously been held for 15 days in La Morita prison after being accused by an ex-girlfriend of harassing and threatening her family. He denied it, and the truth was never fully established, but it gave him a clear picture of the corruption within the walls of the prisons themselves. The prison he was kept in was a Bolivarian National Police Detention Center near Maracay, which he said was an unjust imprisonment engineered by the same corrupt officials he'd been exposing, and he knew he was being noticed by people far more powerful than him. In one of his final posts, he'd publicly asked Venezuela's intelligence service for protection, sharing his exact address online and warning his followers about the threats he was receiving, but those requests went unanswered. And on June 23, 2025, the people he'd been warning everyone about came to find him. In the early hours of that morning, Sarmiento was at home on JJ Montesino Street in the El Piñonal neighborhood of Maracay, live-streaming on TikTok. Then, mid-stream, he heard something. A woman's voice, his mother's, screaming and banging on his door.
Piñonal, calle JJ Montesino. Piñonal, calle JJ Montesino. Sebin, ustedes que me llamaron ahorita, el William Adalejo me está allanando la casa, el comisario del DCDO, enviado por Richo Serpa González. Piñonal, calle JJ Montesino. Sebin. ¡Auxilio! Sebin.
Then, the gunfire started. He's shouting that he's been shot as his mother continues to scream in the background. 2 armed men walk directly into frame, which was followed by immediate gunshots. Seconds later, the stream went dead. His mother had been shot in the abdomen, but survived. As for Sarmiento, he was shot at least 9 times and tragically passed away. The live stream wasn't saved to his TikTok account, but viewers who'd been watching in real time had already started clipping and sharing it, and within hours it had spread across Latin America and beyond. Within days, Venezuela's Attorney General Tarek William Saab announced that the 69th Prosecutor's Office, a unit with national jurisdiction over organized crime, had been assigned to investigate the murder. 4 days after Sarmiento's death, Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello, one of the officials Sarmiento had been tagging in his videos, announced that some of those involved had already been captured and others identified. A woman named Pierina Uribari, the partner of the alleged gunman Adrian Romero, known by the alias Nino Loco, was arrested and charged with aggravated intentional homicide, criminal association, and terrorism. Arrest warrants were issued for Romero and 2 other men, Wilbert Gonzalez and Gerald Nieto, known as Coropo. Wilbert Gonzalez, the man who'd broken a hole through the wall of Sarmiento's house to let the gunman in, never made it to trial. On the 27th of July 2025, he was cornered by officers of the Bolivarian National Police. He resisted, was wounded in the confrontation, and jumped into the waters of Lake Valencia to escape. His body was found on the shoreline weeks later, in an advanced state of decomposition. The Venezuelan government still maintains the Tren de Aragua doesn't exist. Gabriel Sarmiento spent months trying to prove otherwise, and in his final moments, he did just that.